Welcome back to Naval Action and episode 12 of A Letter to the King. For those of you new to the series, A Letter of the King is my attempt to give you a bit of an update on what's happening in the PvP world on PvP 1 Euro. If we remind ourselves of where we were up to last week, we'll see that the main sort of areas of the BIF was Florida with the pirates and the Americans, and the USA had managed to retake a lot of Florida and had just started to step into the Bahamas. I think that's Bimini. They just started to move into the Bahamas. Meanwhile, south of that, the Brits had managed to eat up a little bit of the coast of Cuba. However, they had lost a couple of ports they'd held for a while to the pirates. These had actually been contested with the Spanish previously, but the pirates had managed to snaffle these two up now. The Brits had really started to get stuck into the Danes. The Danes were in a vice because on their other flanks off to the east, the resurgent Swedes had started pushing right into their homeland and were still managing to more or less hold off the French around the middle of the Antilles. At the same time, the French, they'd lost all this area in the previous couple of weeks to a resurgent Dutch, but last week the French had managed to push in against the Dutch, and there was a nice bit of fighting going on around here. Meanwhile, the pirates were trying to hang on to their holdings around Panama, and the Spanish had moved in off Cayman Brac into Georgetown and Little Cayman. So that's where we were at the close of business last week. I do apologise again for Letter to the King being a day late. It's not a habit that's forming. I have a good excuse this time. Yesterday, of course, was Her Majesty the Queen's birthday. God bless her socks and all who sail in them. And it was my birthday too. So happy birthday to me. And I had a lovely meal and a party and drank a lot and ate much food and wasn't really in the best fettle for doing a video. So I'm more or less recovered now, and me and the Queen are back to our regular duties. So let us carry on with our report. So we'll start over here in the Antilles again, and what was interesting to see was the French seem to have got themselves back into the fight. Now, although they didn't make much ground against the Dutch, they held the Dutch from making any more gains and managed to snaffle a couple of extra ports. But while they were doing that, the French also managed to get stuck into the Swedes to the north of them, and working with or at the same time as the Danes really push hard into the Swedes, who had really everything reversed on them. So they were the guys giving it out the last couple of weeks. Well, this week they really got it given back to them. The Danes came back hard and pushed right down. So they took a couple of ports down here. They took the ever-changing Arves. I think that changed hands 3 times last week. They pushed the Swedes almost totally out around Christian land. I think they hold 1 port left. So the Swedes, who were my they were my sort of favourite underdog, the Swedes, against all odds, they'd managed to come back from a couple of ports down to almost 24 ports. Last week was not their finest hour, however. They got a real push from the French and a real push from the Danes. So the Swedes find themselves probably where they were about a month ago, before the Great River Road incident, wherever that is, Road Town incident, somewhere around here, where the Danes let the pirates in and the Swedes took umbrage, and it all kicked off and went left, right, and centre. The Swedes are more or less back to where they were before that happened, except they seem to have a very active French border to their south. It does appear like the Danes have woken up. The Danes and the Brits had good fun across the south of Haiti, with at one point the Brits holding, I think, every island, across every port across the south, and nicking a couple of ports across the top. I think the Danes may have been reduced to just 1 port left on Haiti in what became a real tug-of-war. But at the end of the day, the Danes managed to push the Brits back a little bit and recaptured 3 or 4 of the ports that they'd lost towards the end of the week. The Brits have got eyes for Haiti though, which is interesting. They took Jeremy and I can't remember what this is. Is this Legolas? Off the pirates towards the end of the week. So I think the Brits might have designs on Haiti, just looking at what's going on there. Fair amount of biffo here, and this is the first time the Danes really have been able to fight on two fronts for the best part of a month. So perhaps they're getting some a bit of activity back. Meanwhile, the comeback of the month continues with the Americans pushing into the Bahamas and really snaffling a whole bunch of ports off the pirates, picking up 8 or 9 ports around here off the pirates. And perhaps the worst place to live in the Bahamas this week has been Bimini, which I think changed hands 5 times. So there'll be a lot of rubble there. And of course, this is one of the changes that's happening in the forthcoming patches. The devs have put out the roadmap for the next 3 or 4 months. It's a bit of a skeleton, I think. I think there's lots of potentials and maybes on there. But one of the things they're threatening with, or thinking is going to come in the June content patch, so that means probably next week, is a 7-day cooldown if you capture a port. Now that's going to be very interesting because what it will do is it will open up genuine fronts. At the moment, 30, 40 ports can fall in a day. And there's a real toing and froing. People build a bridgehead, typically off a free port, operate out of the free port, and do as much damage as they can until they've got a bridgehead, then they move out of there. But there's a lot of toing and froing going on now, with 7 days being held. So once you've eaten into the Bahamas, all of a sudden the front line moves. It isn't from the mainland into the Bahamas. Once you've taken 2 or 3 ports and established that bridgehead, that will become a real operating base because you'll have ports that can't be taken back. So that'll be very interesting because it will open up a front line, and of course the ability to strike behind the front line, cut these guys off and set yourself up for the following week. So I'm quite interested to see. I'm a bit worried that the cooldown will mean there's just a lot less PvP. I'm rather hopeful it'll mean that there's a lot less uncontested ports because ports will become more valuable now. Harder to take. Well, not harder to take, but once taken, they're yours for the week. We won't really know until I think it's September. They're saying now, where the war and peace and the alliances and diplomacy, and I'm hoping the more convoluted port battles come in, how this 7-day thing will play out. But it'll be an interesting thing just to watch next week or the week after it comes in, what sort of effect that has. If you remember, the Brits were here in the south sort of tip, the foot of Cuba. This is a big long leg, the foot of Cuba. And they were holding that fairly well, but midweek the Spanish and the pirates both pushed, and they pretty much squeezed the Brits out, although actually at the close of the bell last night the Brits took Escondido back from the pirates. So we'll have to see whether or not the Brits will give up in this neck of the woods, or will they try and push back in? At the moment the Brits are fighting on 3 fronts, which is more than you can probably manage with the current player base, eh? So let's see how that one plays out. The Spanish is interesting, although they didn't do much when they did do it. They seem to have a bit of numbers going for them, so I'm wondering if the Spanish are about to make a bit of a activity comeback. We'll see. Because at the same time as they took these ports, they did lose a couple of others. The Spanish held the 2 islands next to the free port of Cayman Brac, Little Cayman and Georgetown, or St George, can't remember. But the Brits snaffled those back. And so we'll have to see whether or not that's a hot spot, or will the Spanish push elsewhere. It's hard to see where they'd push without really treading on their pirate overlords' toes, although their pirate overlords seem to have kind of gone on holiday a bit, so we'll see what the Spanish do. They might come back into the Bracs, or they might go for these islands here. We'll have to see. The Brits had a bit of new blood infused with the potential merge of PvP2 now on the cards for June. There's a fair few players from PvP2 having a little sniff and a look round PvP Euro. And to that extent, a fairly significant British clan, certainly a decent number of active players at a couple of key time zones. They came over to PvP1 and set themselves up quite quickly and got stuck into it straight away with a couple of the other active clans. And within the week, they pretty much managed to push the pirates completely out of Panama. So all of those ports fell, except for one. And I'm afraid to say that this is not due to any great defence, but it's due to shenanigans. It's very disappointing. There seems to be a chap who likes this port a lot, who has a Dutch alt, and this has happened a couple of times now. And he buys the flag. As soon as the Brits buy a flag, he buys a flag. He plants the flag, and then he doesn't start the port battle and just leaves the flag sitting there. And then the timer runs out, and the Brits use it. So he uses his Dutch alt to buy the flag, plant it, and then lets the timer run out. So unless we can get the Dutch to make a rather funny take of the port when that happens, or we can have people camping the port, I'm afraid that cheating will persist. I don't think the devs really care too much about one port on one of their servers, given the amount of work they've got themselves up for. But that's disappointing behaviour, sir, and I say boo and bar to you. I don't really see the point in cheating. Maybe that's got like 5 silver mines in it or something, I don't know. Why would you do that? 600,000 gold. Anyway, stop cheating, you muppet. And that's really about it for this week's Letter to the King, apart from the wrap-up I'll go to. It's a little bit shorter than normal, but let's be honest, there's a bit fewer players doing the biff at the moment. Server pops down by about 40% on a fortnight ago. I think all the changes to damage models have worn a few people out. They've decided to give it a rest. I've noticed the pirates have gone very quiet. I hold a bit of a theory that when people were getting bored or annoyed with their previous nation, they went pirate because it was easy to do and they were winning and they had some good clans. They got there, of course, there's now no one to fight because they went pirate and they were fighting now the gap they had left. And then I think they quickly got bored being pirate. They realised that it wasn't quite as what they thought it might be cut out to be. I think really we're looking for some new content to revitalise things. Indeed, a couple of pirates have even returned to their original nation, where they've been given awful earache in chat. I think it's terrible. I'm doing a lot of it myself. I don't think you should be able to come back without a bit of earache. But I do think we're at a bit of a hiatus at the moment. We've got clans that are completely on holiday. We've got whole player bases that seem to just go quiet for a fortnight. I mean, the Swedes could just be watching the European Championships. We don't know. Their team's in there, and that's very exciting. The Brits don't bother watching it because they know the terrible end will draw against Wales, and then the last game won't matter. So some of the Europeans will be watching the football. Maybe that's what's happened with the Dutch. They like their football. They're a bit crazy bonkers. The Danes are just being the Russian Danes. They just love fighting the Brits, as per the European Championships. So yeah, we're a bit quiet. I think we need a bit of a boost to the game. The content that's coming, the June patch, I'm not necessarily seeing a lot in there that might be that boost. Ship capture might do it for a few people. I'm very worried about crew hire. That doesn't seem to be something that's going to make it more fun to me. I understand what they're doing, and they're moving the cost of owning a ship from the build of a ship to the crew maintenance. But I have a horrible feeling after each battle you're going to have to go back and rehire crew. I don't mind rehiring crew, it's the fact I have to do an extra 30 minutes sailing after each confrontation. Ship capture might help people back. We've got officers coming. That could be very interesting. That could be a very cool way of allowing you to tweak your ship layout and loadout effectively. If we imagine there must be more types of officers than there are slots for officers, so that might be another way to sort of distinguish your style of play from another. I wish they do that with trading and crafting. I don't know if any of you played the old Star Wars game, but I'd love to see the wood, for example, in the different places around the map. Be of different quality. So the live oak, for example, that comes from the US, which would be closer to the green oak, should be of higher quality than perhaps the live oak you get from somewhere else. And then when you're crafting, I'd love to be able to see little flourishes you can do to hulls and masts and cannons and decks, and you could make a ship with stronger frames, or we can do extra planking at the moment or whatever, just so each ship could be a little bit more different if the crafter put a lot more effort into it. But at the moment, we're not quite seeing that. We're seeing crew hire. That'll be interesting. Officers, that looks interested. Provisioning, double shot and double charge. As much as they're not very historic, the Brits kind of outlawed double shot. In fact, the Brits, if you put two shots into a cannon, you did it because you were 50 yards away, and you actually put less powder in there, so that'll be interesting. Double charge, well, that was a good way of killing yourself, double charge. And although these things aren't necessarily historically super duper, they might be good for gameplay. It might be a good tactic to every now and again be able to do a special shot. They're talking about merging USA PvP 2 in. I'd look forward to that. I just look forward to be more players. We are beginning to wane a bit, so I'm looking forward. But I'm not seeing anything in the June patch that's really going to excitarize people. For me, I'm seeing probably the August patch where they're talking about the diplomacy coming in. The port battles getting sexier in July might be enough. But I'm thinking it might be August, and that's when they first start looking at pirates, which is probably their most difficult change to make. Pirates are the most popular reason for people joining the game or playing the game. If you make them historically accurate, you probably make them something people don't want to play. If you make them fun to play, you run the risk of making them overpowered or the go-to for everybody. So I think that's their biggest game challenge. So let's see how that goes. Anyway, this is drifting away from its purpose. Let's go and have a look. Oh, there's your cheating pirate again, or your cheating Dutch alt. Let's go and have a look at where we think the biff might be next week. So obviously the French pushing both into the Dutch and into the Swedes is going to be interesting. The Swedes against the Danes is going to be interesting. What's going to happen on sort of the east side of Haiti? Are the Danes going to be able to push back in, or are the Brits, have they got eyes on Haiti? That should be interesting. I think this is where the Spanish and the Brits might play. I wouldn't be surprised if the Spanish play here. Given the Brits have taken all but the cheaty bastard port out of Panama, will they start moving up? They've already moved into, I think, Truxillo fell. That's a big strategic port. There was a lot of people had their harbours and boats there. So will the Brits start spreading across and moving up towards the Yucatan? And of course, how will the Americans go? Perhaps this is where the Spanish might entertain themselves. I notice the Americans haven't come down onto the Spanish ports. They're focusing on the pirate ports. So for those looking for it, there's still enough PvP. I'll be interested to see if the patch comes in this week, either this week or next week, for that. Let's have a look how we're going on the tally board. So the pirates had a shocker. They lost 20 ports. That's the double red arrows. 20 ports last week. I think they're on holiday, wherever pirates go on holiday. Spanish made some small gains at the cost mostly to the Brits. The Brits made lots of gains, very much at the pirate expense. The French made lots of gains, very much at the Swedes' expense. The Dutch lost a few ports, again, to the hands of the French. The Americans, they account for half of the pirate losses. The Danes, they account for half of the Swedish losses. The Swedes, well, I'm afraid it's all gone pear-shaped for them again. They lost half of their ports. And so hopefully they'll get knocked out of the European Championships early. and be able to attend back to the naval action malarkey. So there you go, that's it for Letter to the King. I'm hoping next week we might get the new changes. We've got a few of the new folks already coming over from PvP2, so that's always good fun when you've got new folks coming in. So welcome on board, chaps. And I think that's it for this week's Letter to the King. Give us a like, give us a subscribe, and I will see you on the ocean, and I will catch you.